Joy, thank you for joining us on the Spirit Farm podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I am happy to have you. And there's so much to talk about. There's, church stuff. There's writing stuff. I know that you are a writer. You're growing quickly on social media. That's how we met. And the thing that sparked for me, the thing that I saw right away when I came across your profile on Instagram was Christian Misfit. And kind of like cultivating a community of Christian misfits, which I love and I was intrigued by. Tell more.
Yeah, so Christian Misfit, man, they're my people. So I kind of coined the phrase as I just in my own journeys of faith. I've been in ministry most of my adult life, but I've been in the church my whole life. My dad was a pastor, so ages 5 and on, I've been in the church.
Where'd you grow up?
I actually grew up in Alaska. My dad was a pastor of a small church in Alaska. So
no way.
We'd run out of church to go sledding down the hills of the parking lot.
Oh my God.
The big thing was that like the bald eagles outside the windows were super distracting during the worship services. It's like that's like life in Alaska.
Yeah, that's so Nat Geo. And we spend a little bit of time in Washington, so we see some bald eagles, and they're incredible. But when I think of Alaska, I think of the ice, I think of the snow, I think of like the movie Frozen. I think of having like the sun, never go down during parts of the year, and it's always light. Is that real life?
Alaskans know that everybody thinks of it that way, and that's sort of like guys, I didn't grow up in an igloo. Like I didn't take a dog sled to school. There are parts of Alaska that are so far north that really is what it's like there. I was in the southeast part. I was in the capital in Juneau. So how I describe it to people is it was really more like extreme Seattle. Like if Seattle gets like 30 something of inches of rain a year, I think where I lived specifically on the little island that I lived on, because I lived on the island, we got 90 something inches of rain a year. So it just, it's just rainy and gloomy and cold. And then when it's sunny, it's incredible. And those sunny days are worth it. So cool place to grow up. But now Seattle, I live in California. So
you do. Southern California at that. So Seattle, my 3 years in Washington, I got well acquainted with the rain. And 30 inches of rain that's a lot to me. I mean, it was a lot. So 90 extreme Seattle, that's some real stuff. So you lived through some stuff. You must have felt like at the end of those kind of cold, rainy seasons, like you guys had accomplished something. You guys had really.
No, I was a kid. I left when I was 14, so I didn't know any different. I remember being tired of being cold and wet, and I think there was a reason why even in Seattle, by the time I finished high school there, I was like, I don't even care. I'm going somewhere warm for college. Like I'm just tired of being cold and wet all the time. So, but all right, to say,
island, Alaska, dad was a pastor.
Yes.
And that's how you grew up. So you've been involved in kind of churchianity since you were born.
Yes, I have. So dad was a pastor, went to church my whole life, went to a Christian college, and as soon as I graduated, started working in a church and then worked in churches or, parachurch organizations for the next 15 years. So I had an ending to that was painful. We can talk about that later if you want. But at the end of that, I started realizing that there was this angst I had felt kind of the entire time. And it was this sense of, man, I've been in the church my whole life, and I have never felt like I belonged there. I've never felt like I fit in. There's always been something off. And as I started trying to trace back those moments where I like where did this belief come from that I don't belong? And as I traced those back through all of my memories and experiences in the church, I really honed in on this fact, this feeling of like, man, I'm a Christian and I love God and I love church because it's helped me come closer to God. But when it comes to the people at church, I've always felt a distance there, and that's been very painful for me. To feel like the people who are my brothers and sisters in Christ are people that don't accept me as I am. And so I sort of needed a name for that for myself. And so I was like, man, I'm like a Christian misfit. In one sense, I belong in the church because I'm a Christian, but I don't feel like I belong because I'm a misfit. And as I started, just started writing about that and exploring that thought in myself, I found that I wasn't the only one, that there are a lot of people out there who maybe haven't even been able to name that for themselves. But when I say it, they're like, whoa, that's me. I've been in the church, and yet I've always felt this disconnect, this sense of being an outsider, the sense of rejection, this feeling like there's something I'm not getting. There's something I can't break through, and I don't know what it is, but I feel less than because of it. So so now I am here for the Christian misfits to say, you do belong. We do belong. You don't have to fit in to belong. You have a place in the church. Being a misfit is a good and beautiful thing, and God has a role for us. And it's okay if it looks different than it looks for everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so my mind's going a couple of different directions, but I think I want to, before we jump into the misfit, because I've seen you've got some like Misfit Manifesto stuff that I want to for sure hit. But first, I almost had a picture in my mind of you like trying to engage with people and just feeling distance. Can you give us, without naming names, can you give us like an instance or two where you're just like, man, not vibing? Like, why do I feel rejected right now? Or why is this the response that I get to my inquiry? Or, is there one or two like practical instances that people could relate to where you just felt the weirdness?
For sure. I think a lot of it has come to broader awareness. I think part of it is just that I'm an introvert. That the church promotes a really extroverted style of discipleship where you need to join a small group, and the only way you're going to really connect with people is if you share all your deepest, darkest secrets right off the bat and show up for each other. So you go, meet with your small group once a week, but also do other stuff on the side. And also you should be serving in a people-oriented ministry, and you should go to church on Sunday. And like, you should really, the people who we are praising are the ones who are using their 2 weeks of vacation a year to go on a mission trip and sleep in a tiny room with a bunch of people. And
all
that is
things.
not how I am wired. I am a homebody. I need time to myself to restore. I actually really struggle in a small group setting because I don't feel safe opening up to that many people. So I either overcompensate and overshare, and people are like, oh, who's this awkward lady? Or I just shut down and I withdraw, and it's like, oh, who's that snobby lady? And it was like, I couldn't figure out how to crack the code, even like Bible study after small group after small group. It was like, I go in with the best intentions. So that's a big part of it. It's just temperament. There's not a lot of diversity and temperament modeled from mainline evangelicalism, I would say. And the other thing is just, the other big thing I think is having a mind that values introspection and deep thinking and questioning. I remember one instance it was like the first night of women's summer Bible study, and I showed up after, you watch the Beth Moore thing, and then you show up to your group of people, and it's your small group discussion, and everybody comes in, they have their Bibles and their Beth Moore books, and we're in this like little awkward room in the back of the church, and you sit down, and it's all fluorescent lights and bare, and everyone's pretending that it's not awkward, but it's super awkward because we're a bunch of strangers and we're about to talk about our spirituality with each other. And so we sat down, and this discussion leader was like, hey, everybody, glad you're here. We only have 6 weeks together, and the only way we're going to get something out of this is if we're all vulnerable with each other and honest. And so I just want to encourage everybody to share. So as we start going around, we start going through the questions, and I was like an A+ Sunday school student. I know all those answers. I mean, I won the prize at camp for knowing all the trivia to what the camp speaker said. So I know all the Sunday school answers, but at this point in my life, I think I was in my early 20s, I just wasn't interested in that anymore. I was wanting more. I was like thinking there had to be more to faith than what I've been taught. And there was a question at some point, and I kind of disagreed, or I wanted to like, well, I see this other way of like reading this text here. Maybe there's more than one thing we can take out of this text. And so I was like, well, she said be vulnerable. Like,
how
so
dare you?
Put it out there. So I'm like, I remember just asking, like, but I don't know. What if Beth Moore isn't right? I mean, how dare I say that, right? I still do. I love Beth Moore, but I think she would say, like, of course you should question what I'm teaching you. Like, think for yourself. But yeah, I kind of like threw something out there. Like, maybe there's another way to read this first, or maybe there's more to it than what she said, or, like, what do you guys think? And I mean, it was like crickets. Because I had broken the code of female Bible study, which is you don't disagree and you're all nice.
You don't disagree. So like you're all nice.
Until somebody spoke up and was like, well, I think that this is the way, and just kind of like brought everybody back to like, no, here's the way we think about this. Here's the way our church has signed us off on us thinking about this. And I mean, in that moment, I was like, oh, okay, this is not a safe place for me. To think, and I'm the kind of person who, and I think a lot of misfits are this way, but it's like, I don't actually need a ton of, especially introverted misfits, I would say. We don't need like a lot of people. We need a few really important people. And so if I walk into a room and there's like 12 people there, and it's clear to me that none of them are interested in like thinking deeply or being kind or making me feel safe. I shouldn't say that. Those ladies were, I'm sure, very kind, but it was sort of like, what's the point of me being here? Like, if I can't, contribute who I am.
Yeah. Ask questions, be myself.
Yeah.
Be free to be wherever I am on my journey and process, safely with you. I get that.
That's it. I mean, there's a lot more reasons. There's a lot of life stage things.
Sure.
Being single in the church is a huge one. Being divorced in the church, not having children, those life stage things. And as the more I speak, the more stories I hear, and it's just, everybody has a story of a time where they didn't fit the norm, and it's I think it's a real epidemic.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a big issue, and I want to explore that a little bit more with you. But also understand kind of like the common thing that we can both agree on, that all of these churches are going to be flawed and broken because they're led by broken, flawed humans, and we're all a mess. You and me and the people leading the churches. I think where the pain and frustration comes in is when people in leadership pretend that they're not a mess, right? Or pretend that it needs to be perfect, or pretends that everything needs to be a certain way, or pretends that their issues that they have are not as bad as the issues that you have, or that those people have, or whatever. Like that's maybe that's where the disconnect comes. Why there's so much pain. It's not that churches need to be perfect. It's not that we expect anything to just cater to us and be this like safe, soft glove place, but it's just the inauthenticity and the hypocrisy and the inconsistency that probably pains.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I was in church ministry for 15 years, and it's hard. And so I've been in church ministry and have probably hurt people from my role there.
Yeah,
and
me too.
I have been on this side of it too, and feeling hurt. Yeah. So I'm not. Yeah, my mission isn't to be one who just like throws rocks at the church. I really do care about honoring Jesus and finding healthy ways to move forward. I think you're right. There's a balance, because I think there are a lot of times where we say, well, no church is perfect, and use that to excuse some really unhealthy and dysfunctional and abusive behaviors. Like, absolutely, well, no pastor is perfect. But there's a difference between using our humanity and our brokenness as an excuse for bad behavior, and recognizing it as part of our calling to continually humble ourselves and forgive.
Yeah.
Like I think there's a way to be a holy imperfect church, and a holy imperfect church, when faced with, hey, this church structure, this church leadership has really hurt me. Instead of saying, well, you did this, or you're too sensitive, or you weren't on board with the vision, to actually take to heart those hurts and say, gosh, we know we're not perfect. So that means we're in a posture of learning, and we're in a posture of humility, and we're a posture of forgiveness. And I think that is how the church should be. And that is something that I will call the church to, and say, if you are not a place where people can come to you broken, and you're not even validating their hurts, or if you're saying, if you're shoveling hurt people to the side because they don't match with your growth goals, that's, I think, where I draw the line and say, no, we're all imperfect, which requires us to do the work of humility and forgiveness towards each other. Misfits too have work to do in humility and forgiveness, but the church certainly has a role in that as well.
Oh, all of us, all the time, and churches, it can be even a confusing thing, because we in America, we think of it as these 501c3 nonprofit organizations that have branded themselves and built buildings and whatever, and it's not that. Those are organizations, right? Church is just
and
people.
We're seeing that today, aren't we? Because those buildings are just sitting empty, but the church keeps going.
But the church keeps going. The church is just people, right? Trying to figure out who God made them to be, follow Jesus, and do it together. And I think that what you said about relating, being honest, being real, I think that our brokenness is meant to, or we can use to build bridges or to put up barriers. And that, like, we should use. I tried to do this when I was leading a church, is use my pain, use my struggles, use my weaknesses, use my messy past, use whatever to build bridges of connection. And I think that it's easy to get so scared and threatened, like this doesn't validate that the church works if I have issues, this isn't part of our brand, that person is still struggling with this issue. This isn't whatever, this isn't good for business. And so we use it to create barriers, to keep people out, to keep bad people out, all that kind of thing. And it's just so the opposite of Jesus. And it gives kind of the institution of church a bad name in the culture. But what I like about what you're doing, Joy, is that you are not just throwing stones, and we're not just pointing out these things. But let's pivot to what you are doing. You're trying to be helpful. You're trying to create community for people digitally. You're trying to engage people that have maybe been through difficult things. And that's what I think we can celebrate. So let's hit the Christian Misfit stuff a little bit. And then if it helps to tell a little bit of more backstory, feel free to do that. But talk to us about Christian Misfit Manifesto. What is that? What are these things that kind of help identify with the journey that you're on?
Yeah. So as I just started, at the end of my, I was a pastor of worship and communication at a church, and when that role ended, I was faced really, with an identity crisis. Unfortunately, I had tied a lot of who I was into that role and that title. And as I started untangling that, I realized that there was still calling there, that I still am someone called to help kind of shepherd souls and help people, but that my heart was really for people who had been sort of overlooked and fallen through the cracks of church. And so, just as you said, I'm not here to, just be another voice calling down with church. Really, I'm interested in saying, like, all right, all of you who don't fit in for whatever reason or the other, I think what happens is that for those people, there's not really a lot of paths forward for them to continue in their relationship with God, because so many of our discipleship paths are tied to churches or to to these mega church model churches, even if they're not actually mega churches, they're still going to Catalyst and trying to do church that way and stuff, I would say. But this model of church that might not work for some people, for any number of reasons, and that they still need shepherding too, that they still have the desire to grow in their faith, and they don't feel like they have a lot of ways forward. And so I feel like that's my calling. I'm sort of like the self-proclaimed pastor of Christian Misfits of the internet, because I just care, and I just want to tell people, like, you don't have to fit into the church to follow Jesus. You don't have to fit in to belong in God's big kingdom. Like, you're incredible. And so one of the biggest hurdles that we face as Christian misfits are messages that we've heard about ourselves and our worth in the church, either intentionally or unintentionally, just because of a predominant culture in the church can send messages it doesn't intend to, that people hear. And so I think as I
like what, Joy? What would an example be? Like, what's one of those messages that pops for you?
Kind of like I was saying earlier, like, if you're not out with people all the time, you're not actually serving God. If you're not
in this group, on this trip, doing
right,
this
if you're
thing,
not busy
doing our pathway.
And a lot of churches, not every church, but some churches don't really value ministry that someone does that doesn't happen in their four walls. So people can be kind of like, well, I'm called to this, but I have to do this apart from my church. And just there's only so many times you can go to a small group and have no one interested in who you are as a person before you start internalizing that, like, man, like, I guess I'm just not that special of a person, and there's something wrong with me because people don't want to talk to me. And
we just want to answer these four questions on the page. We don't really want to get to know you.
Or like,
that's the
you're
message that
different
gets,
and we don't understand you, and that feels like more work than we're willing to do. So we're gonna like, oh, you're single, like, oh, I don't really know what to think of that. Or like, oh, you are like struggling with your sexuality, like, oh, we don't know what to do with you. So I think the first step in healing for misfits is to do the inner work. And so the manifesto is something I put together, just like, what do we need to know about, like, once we sort of identify like that name and kind of own that name, that's like that's not the destination, that's the first part of like, okay, I feel like a Christian misfit. I love Jesus, but I don't fit in at church. I have faith, but it's at odds with my faith community. Where do I go from here? And so the manifesto is 10 phrases that I put together that I'll probably keep tweaking from here to eternity, by the way. But they're just truths that we can claim for ourselves to reorient our thinking around the truth, and to stop that spiral of messages, those mental ruts that we have developed when we arrive at church, to help us, renew our minds, I would say, and take some of those thoughts captive, to use some Bible verses, but to say, like, no, I don't have to fit in to belong. Like, it's not the people at church that say I have a place there. It's Jesus that says I have a place there, and he made me this way, and he made me on purpose. And my job is not to be what they say, but to be what he says, and then to act in love towards them and hopefully with them. But the healthier that we can get about loving ourselves and owning my lived experience and owning who God has made to be, and accepting it and welcoming it, and not heaping more shame on myself. Man, if you can do that, there's a mental shift that happens to being like, from being like, oh, gosh, nobody wants me, I don't fit in, to being like, I have everything I need to belong. Now, how can I go be an ambassador of belonging to others?
Yeah. See, here's the irony: is that everybody needs what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's just the people like you, the misfits that have like opened up to it, that have like been forced by pain to realize it. But everybody needs this. We all need a mental detox. We all need freedom from the shame. The power brokers in these so-called, church institution boxes, they need it as much as anybody else. It's inner shame that is creating the barriers and the walls that people like you, like me, feel. And we all need it. So I love that you're talking about that. Can you give us a couple of these manifestos? I think that you hinted at one of them already. You said, or maybe that was just a post that you did that I saw. You said, only God invites you into his church and no one can uninvite you. I loved that line.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the core of it that I've come to, is that all these times where we walk into, well, we don't walk into a church building anymore, but when we did, and we walk in and we look around and our brains are trained, if we're misfits, to notice all the ways that everybody else is the same and I'm different. And it's easy to be like, oh man, like I don't belong here. And to switch that thinking and say, no, I do belong here because Jesus invited me and I said yes. And that's the only invitation I need. Like nobody can take that away. But my like other go-to, that's probably the core of my just how I think and posture myself towards ministry. The other one that I say a lot is that you don't have to fit in to belong. That you can be in a room and feel super awkward and still have every right to be there. Because that's when it comes up in those moments. Those when the insecurity flares, just almost as a breath prayer, like, I don't have to fit in to belong. I don't have to fit in to belong. It's okay that I'm here and that I'm different.
As you and I were talking about this podcast, you emailed me. You said, can I get a couple of the questions up front or whatever, just so I can prepare a little bit, so I'm not as awkward. And then you said, introvert and awkward are kind of my brand, but I still would like to be prepared. So it's something that you're just, I love that you're just like owning who you are. It's like, this is just me. Whether I'm in a church box or at a party or at a dinner this is just me.
It's been so freeing just to be able to say like, hey, sorry, I was awkward again. I think you know that about me. Like, please let me know if I'm offensively awkward, because I do that sometimes. But I've spent so much of my life trying to hide and pretend I'm not, and trying to like, hey, just be normal. Just like, okay, what are the normal people doing? Do what they do. And I mean, it just is, it's ridiculous. So, I just kind of
do what they do.
It. I mean, it's a weird place in here, Caleb. I don't think, and the things that get filtered out, even once I embrace my awkwardness, it's interesting in here. But other parts of the manifesto, probably another one the other one I would really say is important to me is just the belief that God's church isn't complete without me. That not only do I belong, but that I am this way on purpose, and that I have a calling, and it is different than other people's, and not everybody might understand it, and that's okay. And my calling is to be faithful to that calling, no matter how weird everybody else thinks it is, because that's what God saw fit when he invited me to be part of his church.
I love it. I would even broaden that further, in at least in my mind, what's going on in here, and say that we were created with God's DNA. Like you were created in the image of the source of life, of the designer, of the creative source. You have God's DNA in you, in your soul. You reflect this God in a way that no one else does. We need you in humanity, let alone, however we think of framing the church. We need you in humanity to help reflect who this God is. Without you, we wouldn't see this reflection of the Creator. We need you to do your part, and I love that you're doing it. And I could see that even from an Instagram feed.
Yeah, totally. I think that we we've really forgotten just how creative God is. And we've sort of limited in our attempts to be right and to be true, we've kind of limited some of the color and the bedazzling that God did when he made humanity. There's some of us who are just weird sparkles on the edges, you know, and in our efforts to, you know, in our efforts to reach a lot of people, you know, you go for that common denominator to like, okay, well, here's the common age of people in our community. Like that's our target. But you miss the people on the edges sometimes when you do that. So
that's it. Yeah. I mean, it's a good business practice to like aim for that majority middle, right?
Yeah.
But we're all different.
Yeah.
And the extreme, quirky, eccentric people are the most fun.
Yeah, they really are. Yeah. And they're, just, and I sense it, even in myself too. Just welcome the people who make you scratch your head and just hear their stories and to hear what they have to say about things. It's just, it's so good. Yeah. You said something earlier too. I was thinking, you keep saying like, well, it's not just misfits that need to hear this. It's everybody. And it's so funny because, I mean, this was a big part of my own healing, is that as I started, like just putting things out there and having people come to me, some of the people who were coming to me and saying, oh my gosh, thank you so much for saying this. Like I've never felt like I belonged either. And they were actually the people that I personally was looking at and thinking like, oh man, they're in the inside. They get it. Like they're the normal people. And the normal people were the ones coming to me and saying like, yeah, I don't fit in either. And I was like, what have I been thinking? Like, I just realized how my own thought has closed me off to welcoming the weird in other people and to assuming that everybody who looked or everybody who wasn't awkward in the small group, like had nothing else unique to offer. And so it was really humbling for me too. And that's a practice now. Like if I do walk into a room and I have like a misfit attack and I'm like, oh my gosh, they're all the same. I'm the only one here who's weird. Nobody gets me. I will, as a practice, look around the room and either internally or if there's a chance externally, just appreciate something unique about each person and appreciate something that each person has to offer. And when I can flip that script and go into a place of like love and admiration for God's individual creativity in each person, even as they're different from me, it not only like confirms my ability to love and accept myself, but just puts me in a posture to truly be in community because we're all equal.
Yeah. Well, that's so good, Joy, because not only are we all equal, we're all insecure. Right? What's that line that everybody's fighting a battle that you know nothing about, right? So yeah, when we are at those dinner tables, when we are at those parties, when we are at those groups affiliated with church or otherwise, to internalize and then even say out loud, you know, hey, I appreciate this about you because us overcoming our introvertedness and our insecurity is going to break through for them. And we're not even going to realize that even though they look like they had it together, they're stinking insecure too. They feel they're wondering if they don't fit. It's just, I think that's just true of almost all of us.
So true. I mean, it's like we're all misfits. Some of us just happen to be born in the right time, in the right place, where our like personality kind of like goes with the norm. And so we can kind of hide a little bit better than others. But I think deep down, you're right. Like we all feel that, oh, everybody blank, but me. Like we all feel in that blank differently, I think. But you're right. It's sort of the funny thing about my work is that I'm reaching people who feel like they're the odd one out, only to bring them into a community where like everybody's the odd one out, you know? So.
Yeah, Steve Jobs had this, he had this figured out. Remember, he had his kind of like line about the misfit.
Yeah,
and he targeted Apple.
Ones.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits. He targeted that. And now look, we all have, we're shooting this on Apple devices. It's like everyone relates to that. Everyone's like, yeah, I am a little different. I want to express my uniqueness. And so
I should have worn it. I had a I had a shirt made that says "Rise of the Misfits." I should have worn it today, but it's true. It's
nice.
I mean, I truly believe that's one of the things the Holy Spirit is just doing right now in His church, is that as times shift and the church shifts, and there's always, you know, a letting go of old wineskins and embracing new wineskins and how we do ministry. But I truly think that there is like this awakening among all the people who felt less than in the kingdom of God, and that they're being awakened to see like, no, I do have a role. And it really is this like rise of the misfits, not to take over the world, but I think that people with experiences like mine, and for the record, I think there are other people who have way more traumatic misfit stories than me. I'm like a white married straight female who's been in the church my whole life. Like I don't have the corner on misfit stories, but but as we like embrace those, the compassion that has been born in us, that can be born in us through our experiences, man, I think the world is just desperate for some compassion and some empathy and some kindness. And I think that those of us who have been on the outside, we get what we know, what we wish we could have had. And if we can get to the place where we can offer that to the world, like, man, what a compelling evidence of God's love for the world that could be.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned earlier, Joy, that whereas you didn't fit in with the traditional methodologies for how churches kind of organize and encourage their people to do stuff. What are you doing these days that you feel like helps you really stay connected to God?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting to figure out how to release some of those expectations and some of those teachings that aren't beneficial to me, while still like doing things that are healthy and developing routines that are healthy for me. So I felt a lot of permission from God to experiment and to try things and to end things and see like, maybe this isn't helpful for me right now. Like, is that okay, God? And He's like, well, let's try. So in this season, like my family is not attending a church right now. We don't log on every Sunday to a church, but instead we have gotten more structured about embracing a Sabbath. So we have screen-free Sunday in our house. You know, we're not on our phones. The kids aren't on screens.
Screen-free Sunday.
Screen-free Sunday. And
I like it.
The rest and the peace that has brought into my house has felt so holy, even though we're not going to church, which as a former worship pastor, I'm like, how can I not go to church? I mean, that was like, come to church. That was my job, to get people to come to church. So that's been a shift, and I'm not saying other people need to stop going to church for right now.
Oh no, I hear you. Yeah,
that's where we are. Online church is weird anyways, but for us, the sort of that like embracing Sabbath is like a good next step. And then just sort of, I had to do quite a bit of work unpacking some baggage I had around quiet times, where, you know, having been in a conservative Christian college, it was, you know, a lot of, if you want to hear God speak to you, open your Bible. You got to read, you know, if you want to follow Jesus, there's really no other way than to read your Bible every day. Things that I think can be good, but the way it was prescribed to me got me to the point where I felt guilty and frustrated and angry every time I tried to open the Bible. I mean, I've written about this. It was like, I felt like I had a dirty
angry right now.
I was like a pastor who hated quiet times, right? I was like just living this double life.
Living this double life.
But
No, I get that, Joy. I get that. And here's the thing is I think that anytime we make something an idol, it's getting in the way of us really honoring God and connecting with God. And I think that the quiet time, the Bible, even other methodologies, other things, other expectations, if they become an idol that's lifted up, like you must do this. This is the only way to do this. Oh, how can you not be doing it? Then it's out of whack. It becomes part of the problem instead of helping us connect. And so, yeah, I would agree with you.
So that was my story. And so I went to a spiritual director and just started kind of unpacking some of that. Like, who am I really trying to impress right now? What do I think God really thinks of me? Like, I'm afraid God's going to be mad at me if I don't read the Bible for 30 minutes a day with my commentary open next to it. You know, I found that was a narrative in my head, and I had to say out loud, like, no, he's not. Like, I'm free. Like, I'm free to pursue God. And so I just started trying to, like, okay, I actually really like journaling, and I found some other ways to connect with God, just walking, or having really good conversations about God with my husband or with my friends. Like, those are all ways we connect. So I'm still in process on that because I have 2 young kids and routines are a challenge at any capacity right now. But I have the freedom. I feel the freedom with God to just be in this stage of life and to be in process and be healing and to just come to him out of love and relationship and obey when he says it's time. You know.
Well, and just to be where you are.
Yeah.
Be where you are. I think like the biggest spiritual growth, ingredient is just simply saying yes, right? It's like, it's surrender. It's surrendering to what is. And I find that in this season of my life, one of the best parts of surrender for me, because I'm like a methodical type A, let's get this done. Let's, set the goal. Let's, achieve the thing. And I have 3 young kids that's not how they operate. They just want time with me. They just want to be a part of it. They just want, to play. They just whatever. And COVID threw, everyone for a loop, and our expectations and how things were supposed to go and supposed to do. So much of our life is out of our control. Surrender to it. Surrender to what is. Playing with my kids is one of my best spiritual exercises that I do. Playing highball in the backyard, swimming in the pool, going for a walk, shooting hoops. It's just surrendering to where God has us in this life and doing everything that we do with kind of just an awareness that God is with us, that God is in this, that God is showing me something in each and every moment if I'm paying attention, if I'm engaged.
There's a metaphor that's been really helpful to me, and it's funny because it ties into the name of your Spirit Farm, but just we talk about growth a lot. I think churches are really good at helping people grow, but if you look at a farm or anything in nature, the growing season is actually like a short season. The other parts of growth are, look at the seasons. Look at a tree. It grows in spring and summer, but what happens in fall?
Yeah,
it dies, all that growth falls away, and then in winter it lies fallow, like it lies dormant. And those seasons of loss and dormancy are just as important for our growth. Like you can't grow without the rest and the dormancy. So right. I agree. Just embracing the rest has been also a huge part. I read John Mark Comer's book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, at the beginning of this year, and like what a prophetic book for the whole year, because he's really calling us to embrace that that discipline of rest. But yeah, I agree that there's a lot that can happen when you stop trying to impress God and you stop trying to do everything right, and you just let him love you the way you think he wants you to love others.
And you mentioned that journaling is a part of it for you too. And I've seen just via the interwebs and the profiles that you are a writer and that you're engaged in a writing community as well. Can you say a little bit about that? So what is it that you write, and what's this writing community?
So I write on Instagram and on my website. Come find me there if you're interested.
Yeah, is it joyvetterlein.com?
Mm-hmm. It is, yeah. Just my name, joyvetterlein.com. It's a weird last name, but at least nobody else had my domain.
You got the domain. It's worth it.
The domain. But yeah, and so that's something I've always been a writer, and knew that was part of my next steps when I was looking for next steps, was to leaning into the power of words to minister to people.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
That's awesome. Joy, I love it. And I am grateful for you taking this time and sharing your misfit heart with us. It's an encouragement. And I think that hopefully there's been some awakenings for us as we've, engaged with you, as we listen, as we kind of sense what's happening, that to embrace our inner misfit. Like that we're all misfits, and to lean into that weirdness and to create space for other people to be different and to be weird, and to invite, whether it's church or whether it's, hosting in your own house, dinner parties, or whether it's, clubs for the kids' school or whatever, wherever we encounter people, just letting them be them, and letting God meet people wherever they are, and using our own misfit messiness to build bridges and not put up barriers is a lot of what I'm taking from this. I appreciate your openness.
Yeah, well, and I really appreciate you even having this conversation, because I know as someone who's been in big churches before, it's like I appreciate you inviting this conversation, because I think you're absolutely right. That's the message I'm trying to put out there, to those who feel like misfits and who take on that label, just to say, I see you, you're not alone, and you're okay, and there's a place for you, and there's a path for you. You don't have to fit in to belong. But then to say to others who wouldn't identify with that, just to say, like, hey, like our voices matter too. There's more than one way to follow Jesus. There's more than one, discipleship has a lot of different expressions, and we would love, like you said, embracing that diversity of people and of temperament into church leadership, into whose stories we tell, and getting creative with how we create safe places for all kinds of people within our church structures, whatever those may be. So that's the dream for me. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I appreciate you hearing that and being receptive to it.
Yeah. Well, I'm on board with you, and I just want to say too, while we're recording here, that before we started, you and I discovered that not only had we both worked in churches and seen the good, the bad, and also the ugly, but we worked in churches that were in very close proximity to one another, and I know exactly the church that you worked at, and it was like down the street from where we lived.
I visited the church that you worked at.
Yeah. So, and we didn't put that together until an hour ago. And but it's cool. It's cool to meet you this way. I thank you for sharing, and we will follow you. We'll throw up your social media stuff. Your website, we said, was joyvetterlein.com, and your Instagram handle @joyvetterlein. You got them both.
Yep, and I got the Facebook and the Twitter too.
You're everywhere.
I have the corner on Joy Vetterlein in the world.
You're well branded. The awkward introvert is well branded.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Well, thanks, Joy.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Really appreciate it. Great talking with you.
You too.